He checked in at 2:47 a.m. That's not my memory talking, that's the log. I pulled it myself the morning his wife called, and I sat there staring at the timestamp for probably 10 minutes before I could make myself dial her back. I'd been a night dispatcher for 11 years by then. You hear a lot of things in that job. You develop a kind of emotional callus, not because you stop caring, but because caring too much at 3 a.m. night after night will hollow you out. You learn to separate yourself. You take the call, you log the position, you move on to the next driver. That's the job. That's always been the job. But that morning, staring at that log, I couldn't separate myself from anything. He was running a refrigerated load out of North Platte, Produce, headed for Salt Lake City. Standard haul. He'd done that exact run close to 40 times by my count, which means I talked him through it close to 40 times. I knew his voice the way you know a song you didn't choose to memorize. Just absorbed it over years call by call. He checked in right on schedule when he crossed the Wyoming state line. Conditions are clear. The road is dry. Load stable. Temperature holding. And then he said something that I still think about. He said, "Feels good tonight." Just like that. Casual. And I remember because he almost never said things like that. He was a complainer. A good man, a reliable driver, genuinely one of the best I ever dispatched, but a complainer. The wind was always wrong, or the load was overweight, or dispatch had him sitting at a dock for 3 hours past his appointment time. Something was always grinding on him. That was just his personality. It wasn't bitterness. It was more like he just noticed things that weren't right and felt compelled to say so. So when he said "feels good tonight," I actually stopped typing and wrote it down on the notepad I kept beside my keyboard. Not in the system, just on paper. I don't know why. Something about it felt worth keeping. His next check-in was due at 4:15. He had a fuel stop and a 30-minute window at the Little America truck stop in Uinta County, which is right where he should have been by then if he'd held his speed and the road stayed clean. Little America out there on I-80 is one of those places that feels like it exists outside of time. Massive parking lot, 90 fuel pumps, the kind of place you can lose an hour without meaning to. He liked it. Said the coffee was better than it had any right to be for a truck stop. He never called. I tried him on channel 19 at 4:20. Static. Tried again at 4:35. Nothing. By 4:50 I was calling his cell, which went to voicemail on the first ring. Not after several rings on the first, which means the phone was either off or dead or somewhere without any signal at all. I left a message. I kept my voice neutral because that's what you do. You don't panic into someone's voicemail. You say "call me back when you get this," and you sit on your hands and you wait. By 5:30 I couldn't wait anymore. I flagged it with my supervisor and we called Wyoming Highway Patrol at 6:02 a.m. I remember that timestamp too. I've remembered a lot of timestamps from that night. It's the kind of detail your brain grabs onto when everything else is too large to hold. The trooper who responded later told me they located the rig at 8:11 a.m., pulled off on the eastbound shoulder of I-80 near milepost 68. That's in Sweetwater County. Flat, wide-open country, the kind of landscape where you can see 20 miles in every direction and there's almost nothing to see. The truck was running. Headlights on. Both doors locked from the outside. And here is the part that nobody who hears this story ever quite knows what to do with. His logbook was open on the dash. Open to that night's page. His handwriting, his pen, his last entry timestamped at 3:22 a.m. That put him roughly 35 miles east of where the truck was sitting when the troopers found it. 35 miles he'd driven after that log entry with no radio contact, no cell activity, no stop recorded anywhere. Just the truck moving through Wyoming in the dark and then stopping and then him being gone. The doors were locked from the outside. That's the detail I keep handing to people when they ask me to explain it, because it's the detail I can't explain myself. You can lock the doors of most trucks from outside with the key. So someone had a key or he locked them himself from outside, which means he got out first and then locked up after himself. Like he was securing the load before walking into a truck stop. Like he expected to come back. There are no cameras on that stretch of I-80. You'd think there would be major interstate commercial corridor, one of the main arteries for freight moving east to west through the country, but that particular section has gaps. Long ones. The nearest camera with any useful angle was at a rest area 12 miles back. and it showed his truck passing at 3:31 a.m., moving at normal speed, nothing visibly wrong. No weather event that night. The temperature was cold but not extreme, around 22 degrees, which is uncomfortable but not dangerous if you're dressed for it, and he kept a good jacket in the cab. No mechanical issue, the rig was in fine shape when they inspected it, nothing that would have forced a stop. No signs of a medical episode inside the cab. No blood, no vomit, nothing disturbed. His thermos was in the cup holder between the seats. The trooper who opened the door, he told me later, kinda quietly, like he wasn't sure he should be saying it, said that the coffee inside was still warm. I've thought about that a lot. Not just what it means about timing, though it does mean something about timing. I've thought about it because it's such a specific human detail. He'd made coffee somewhere, probably at the North Platte terminal before he pulled out, or maybe at a stop I don't have a record of, and he'd been drinking it on the drive, and there was still some left, and it was still warm, and he was just gone. What I keep coming back to, the thing that doesn't let me go, even now, years later, sitting in a different city doing a different job, is that last transmission. Feels good tonight. That's the last thing I ever heard from him. Not a distress call. Not confusion. Not silence that built slowly and gave you time to prepare. Just a man telling me the night felt good, and then 35 miles of darkness, and then nothing. I've dispatched drivers over a lot of years and a lot of miles, and I can tell you that the highway at night is its own kind of world. The ones who do it for decades develop a relationship with that world that's hard to explain to people who sleep in beds every night. The road becomes familiar in a way that goes past directions and mileage. You start to know the feel of certain stretches, the way the wind moves in certain parts of Wyoming, the way the sky looks at 3 a.m. over the salt flats in Utah. It becomes almost intimate. Drivers talk about it sometimes when they call in. Not sentimentally, just noting it, saying what's out there. He was one of those drivers. He knew I-80 like he knew his own driveway. He was not a man who made careless decisions, and he was not a man who scared easily, and he was not a man with anywhere he'd rather be than where he was going, which was home eventually after Salt Lake 2 days later. His wife told me, when I finally spoke to her, that he'd been planning to repaint the garage when he got back. That he'd bought the paint already and had it sitting in a corner. That he'd been making a list of the things he wanted to fix around the house that spring. I don't know why she told me that. Maybe she needed someone to understand that he was in the middle of something. That he wasn't finished. That a man who buys paint and makes lists doesn't walk away from a running truck on a dark shoulder in Wyoming in February. I agreed with her. I told her so. And I meant it. Wyoming Highway Patrol kept the case open for a long time. Search and rescue went out twice. The surrounding area is largely BLM land. Flat in some places, broken by ravines and dry creek beds in others. If a person walked off that shoulder in the dark and kept going, they'd have had a lot of nothing to walk into. The cold would have been a factor. But they found nothing. Not a boot print, not a piece of clothing, not a trace. There are things in this job that follow you home. Most of the time you manage it, you carry it, you set it down somewhere in the back of the house, you don't look at it every day. I've gotten pretty good at that over the years. But there are a few I've never put down, and this is one of them.
2:47 a.m.
Wyoming state line. Load stable, road dry, temperature holding. Feels good tonight. And then 35 miles he drove without a word, and a truck locked neatly from the outside, and a cup of coffee still warm enough that a state trooper felt the need to mention it, quietly, to someone he didn't know, because some details are too specific to keep to yourself. I still have that notepad page. I don't know why I kept it. I don't know what I think it means. But his handwriting is on the back. I'd handed it to him once when he was in the office to take down an address, and he'd written it down and handed it back, and I just kept using the same page. His handwriting. An address he needed once, for a delivery he made years ago, to a place he probably never went back to. That's all I have left of him. That and the log. And whatever 2:47 a.m. on a Wyoming highway looked like from behind his windshield. In the dark, feeling good, just before whatever happened, happened. I almost didn't go in that night. That's the part I've never said out loud to anyone. Not to the sheriff's deputy who took my statement. Not to my sister when I told her what happened months later. I almost stayed in my car in the parking lot and ate the gas station sandwich I'd bought in Shamrock and called it a night. I was tired. It was cold. The pilot on 40 outside of Amarillo gets loud even at 3 a.m. Rigs pulling in and out, the diesel smell hitting you the second you crack the door. And I had another 4 hours of driving ahead of me, and I just wanted to sit in the quiet for a minute before I went back to it. But the sandwich was bad. I mean, genuinely, impressively bad. So I went inside. I worked the overnight at that pilot for about 3 years. You get used to the rhythm of it, who comes in when what they want. Long-haul guys who've been on the road for 2 days have a certain look. They move slowly, they talk slowly, they make deliberate choices about food because the wrong thing at 3 a.m. when you've got hours left on the road is a real problem. Regular customers I knew by their order. New faces I clocked by habit, not suspicion, just the low-level awareness you develop when you're alone in a building in the middle of the night and the nearest anything is 6 miles up the highway. The man who came in around 3:15 was not a regular. Big guy, not heavy, just large, the kind of large that looks like it used to be stronger than it is now. Maybe 50, maybe a little older. Wearing a canvas work jacket, brown or dark green. Hard to tell under the fluorescent lights. No logo on it, which I noticed because almost everybody who drives professionally has something. A company name, a union patch, a state association sticker on the sleeve. This jacket had nothing. Just worn canvas and a button missing on the left cuff. He came in the way tired people do. Not looking around, eyes already on the coffee station like he'd mapped the store before he walked through the door. Poured a black coffee without hesitating. Picked up a honey bun from the rack beside the register. Came to the counter. Exact change. Didn't look at the total before he put the money down, which meant he'd bought that combination before, enough times that the price was just in him. I said something like, "Cold night out there." He said, "Yeah." He stood at the counter for a moment after I gave him his change, and it wasn't awkward exactly, it was more like he was buffering. Like something was running in the background and he was waiting for it to finish before he could move on. Then he looked up and asked me if we still had the payphone outside. He said it like he'd been there before, which surprised me. I'd never seen him, but that didn't mean much. 3 years of overnight shifts, thousands of faces. I told him yes, by the fuel island, the old one with the busted light above it. He thanked me and went out. I watched him through the window. I want to be clear about that. I watched him because it was 3 in the morning and it was a slow night and I had nothing else to do, not because anything felt wrong. He walked across the parking lot, which was maybe 2/3 full of rigs at that hour, and found the payphone on the far side of the fuel island. Picked up the receiver. Dropped in the coins. He had them ready. Didn't have to search his pockets, which meant he'd been planning to make this call before he came inside. He dialed. Stood there. And then he just listened. For about 2 minutes, he didn't say a word. Receiver pressed to his ear. Body completely still. Looking at some point on the asphalt in front of him. Not the blank stillness of someone listening to a long message. Something more focused than that. More deliberate. Like someone receiving information they had to concentrate to absorb. Then he hung up. He stood at the payphone for another moment. Maybe 15 seconds, maybe 20, and then he walked north across the parking lot. Not toward the fuel island. Not back toward the entrance. North, which in that lot means toward the dark end where the pavement gives out and the scrubland starts. There were rigs parked over that direction, so I figured he was heading to one of them. The lot was full enough that I couldn't see exactly where he went. I went back to stocking the cooler. At 6 a.m., a driver came in asking if anyone had seen the owner of the Kenworth T680 at Pump 7. The one with Arkansas plates and a flatbed load of steel pipe. He said he'd been parked next to it since midnight and the truck was still running, which he'd ignored at first because some guys let their trucks idle all night. But now it was 6 a.m. and nobody had come back to it, and that was unusual enough that he figured someone should know. I went outside with him. The Kenworth was idling. Had been idling, it turned out, since sometime before 3 a.m. The fuel receipt the company pulled later showed the truck had stopped for diesel at 2:58 a.m. So he'd fueled up, and then at some point between 2:58 and whenever I'd watched him cross the parking lot, he'd gone inside and bought a coffee and a honey bun and called a number from the payphone outside. The sheriff's deputy who took my statement was polite about it. He wrote everything down, asked me to repeat the part about the payphone twice, asked if I could describe the jacket more specifically. I told him what I told you, canvas, no logo, button missing. He wrote that down too. I asked if they'd been able to pull the payphone records to see what number he called. The deputy said they were looking into it. I never heard back about whether they found anything. I don't know if that means the number was a dead end or if it just fell through the cracks the way things do when a case doesn't have an obvious direction to go. What I know is what the company told his coworker, who told the deputy, who mentioned it to me when I ran into him at the same pilot about 3 weeks later. The man's cell phone was on the passenger seat of the Kenworth. His wallet was in the center console. His logbook was closed on the dash with a pen clipped to the cover, the kind of thing you do when you're done for the night, not when you're stepping out for 10 minutes. His keys were in the ignition. The Arkansas company he contracted for reported the load as a total delay. The pipe never made it to its destination in New Mexico. Someone else eventually went and got it. I don't know what happened to it after that. Here's the thing that I've turned over in my mind more times than I can count, across more than a decade since that night. He had the coins ready. That's what stays with me. Not the silence on the phone, not the walking north into the dark, though both of those stay with me too, in their own way. But the coins. He walked into that store, bought his coffee and his honey bun with exact change, and when he went to the payphone he didn't have to look for quarters. They were already in his hand, or already in his front pocket where he could get to them instantly. On a night when he had a functioning cell phone sitting on the seat of his truck 20 yards away. So he'd decided, before he walked in, that he was going to use the payphone. Which means he'd decided he didn't want to use his own phone. Which means he either didn't want the call traced to his number, or he didn't want it logged in his call history, or he was calling someone who wouldn't pick up if they saw his number coming through. Or it means something else entirely. I've been over it enough times that I don't trust my own interpretations anymore. The deputy asked me, when I told him about the coins, if I thought the man seemed scared. I had to think about it for a long time, and the honest answer is no, he didn't seem scared. He seemed settled. The way someone seems when they've made a decision they've been sitting with for a while and have finally come to terms with. That particular kind of quiet. I've described it to people over the years and gotten different reactions. Some people think what I'm describing sounds like relief. Some people think it sounds like resignation. I've wondered, honestly, if there's a difference. His truck sat at Pump 7 until noon, when the company sent a local driver to move it. The flatbed load of steel pipe sat on that Kenworth for 6 days before anyone dealt with it. By then the story had moved through the truck stop the way stories do. Everyone had a theory, nobody had information, and eventually the parking lot filled back up with the next wave of drivers who didn't know anything about it and were just trying to get somewhere before their next check-in. The payphone got removed about 8 months later. The company that owned it finally decided it wasn't worth maintaining. I watched the guy take it out, 30 minutes, crowbar, pickup truck. Gone. After he left, I stood there looking at the bracket on the wall where it had been, the little square of slightly less faded paint where the housing used to sit. I thought about the man standing at it in the dark, coins ready, listening to whatever was on the other end of that line. I thought about how he walked north and I went back to stocking the cooler. And I thought about how the only difference between a thing that matters and a thing that disappears is whether anyone was watching closely enough, for long enough to say, I saw that. That happened. That was real. I was watching. I just didn't know what I was watching until it was already over. The desert doesn't take things. That's what I want you to understand before I tell you any of this. People say that. They talk about the Nevada desert like it's alive, like it reaches up and pulls things down into itself. I've lived out here my whole life. 43 years in this county. The desert doesn't take anything. It just holds whatever gets left in it, and it holds it quietly, and it doesn't care whether you find it or not. That's almost worse. US 93 between Ely and Las Vegas is not a road most people know. If you're not from Nevada, you've probably never heard of it. It doesn't have the romance of Route 66 or the traffic of I-15. It's just 2 lanes of blacktop running south through the high desert, past dry lake beds and juniper flats and the occasional ranch gate that leads to something you can't see from the road. The speed limit is 70, but people drive it faster than that because there's nothing to slow down for. No towns for stretches of 40, 50 miles. No services. No cell signal through most of the middle section. Just the road and the sky and whatever's out there in the scrub on either side. In late February out here, the cold is a different kind of cold than most people are used to. It's not wet. is not the cold that soaks into you like the Midwest or the Northeast. It's a dry, still cold that sits on top of you like pressure. At night, with no clouds and no light pollution, the temperature drops fast. By 2 a.m. on a clear February night in this part of Nevada, you're looking at single digits in the open flats. Maybe below zero in the low spots where the cold air pools. I tell you all of that because it matters. It matters to what we found, and it matters to what we didn't find. A woman called our office on a Wednesday morning. Her husband hadn't come home. He was an owner-operator, had his own rig, ran his own loads, kept his own schedule, which meant there was no company dispatcher to flag it before she did. He'd left 3 days earlier with a partial load of industrial equipment, southbound on 93 toward Las Vegas, and he told her he'd stop in Ely for fuel and call her from there. He stopped in Ely. I confirmed that myself, drove up there and talked to the woman at the fuel desk personally, because I wanted to look at the receipt and look at the pump camera footage before I decided how serious this was. The receipt showed he'd fueled at the Ely Tesoro station at 4:47 p.m. The camera caught him at the pump, his truck, him getting out, him going inside briefly. The woman at the desk remembered him, said he bought a blue Gatorade, said thank you when she gave him his change, went back out to his rig. He pulled out of the Ely station heading south on 93 at approximately 5:03 p.m. We found the truck 53 miles south of Ely on a Friday morning. Spotted it from the road. A semi pulled off on a wide gravel shoulder that ranchers and highway crews use sometimes to turn around or wait out a dust storm. Far enough off the pavement to be deliberate. Not slid off, not forced off. Driven off carefully and parked. And here is the thing that set the tone for everything that followed, the thing I keep coming back to when I try to explain this case to people who ask me about it. The parking brake was set. Not just the truck left in gear on an incline. The parking brake engaged correctly, the way a driver engages it when they're planning to leave the vehicle unattended. The load, industrial equipment, steel components strapped down on a flatbed was fully secured. Every strap in place, every binder tight, like he'd done a pre-trip walk-around before he left. His jacket was on the seat. His boots were on the floor of the cab, side by side, like he'd stepped out of them and set them there. His wallet was in the center console. His phone was face down on the passenger seat. We found no keys, which the manufacturer later confirmed meant they were likely in his pocket. The truck had a push-start system and the fob goes with the driver. So he had his keys. He had no wallet, no phone, no jacket, no boots. In February, in the Nevada high desert, at night, because the timeline put him at that location somewhere between 6 and 8 p.m. based on his fuel stop and average road speed. I've been the chief deputy in this county for 9 years. Before that, I worked patrol for 12. I've worked accidents, I've worked drownings in the summer when people underestimate the rivers. I've worked 2 homicides in my career and a handful of suicides and more missing persons cases than I'd like to count, most of which resolved themselves within 48 hours when the person turned up at a family member's house or a hospital 3 counties over. I say all of that not to establish credentials but to explain that I've developed a certain instinct about cases, an early read, usually within the first hour of a scene, about what kind of case I'm actually looking at. Standing at that truck on that gravel shoulder, I didn't know what kind of case I was looking at. That had never happened to me before. We searched for 4 days. Volunteer crews, a helicopter from the state, 2K, 9 units out of Elko. The terrain in that section of 93 is a mix of open flats and broken country. Dry creek beds cutting through the scrub, low ridgelines running east toward the Snake Range, patches of terrain that look flat from the air but are actually a series of shallow washes that you can walk into and disappear from sight within 20 yards of the road. The K-9 units got a track leading northeast from the truck. About 200 yards out, the track went cold. Handlers said it just stopped. Not at a water source, not at a road, not at any feature that would explain it. Just stopped. One of them told me she'd never had that happen before on an open ground track. Said her dog sat down and looked at her. We searched every wash in a 3-mile radius. We checked a dry lake bed about 4 miles east that local ranchers use as an informal landing strip sometimes. We checked 2 abandoned mine shafts that are marked on the county survey maps. Lowered a camera into both. Nothing. On the 3rd day, we asked the state to send a dive team to a section of the Steptoe Valley drainage that runs maybe 2 miles west of where the truck was found. It's not much of a waterway, more of a seep really in most seasons, but in late February after a wet January it was running. They spent 6 hours in that water. Nothing. His wife drove out from Elko on the second day. I met her at the scene. She stood at the open door of the cab and looked at his boots for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "He never goes anywhere without his boots. Not even to the mailbox." That was the first thing she said to me. Later, in my truck, she told me about his routine. How he called her every evening when he stopped. How he'd been driving this route or variations of it for 11 years and had never once missed a check-in without a good reason. How the load he was carrying was due in Las Vegas on Thursday and he told her he wanted to get it delivered early because they had plans that weekend, her birthday, a dinner reservation she'd made 2 months in advance at a restaurant in Elko that required a reservation 2 months in advance. She had the confirmation email on her phone. She showed me, 2 months out. A man who makes a dinner reservation 2 months in advance, sets his parking brake correctly, secures his load, and takes his keys with him. That man is coming back to his truck. That man has a plan. That man is not walking barefoot into the Nevada desert in February without a reason so urgent it overrode every instinct he had. We never found a footprint. Not one. The ground in that area is a mix of hardpan and loose gravel that doesn't hold impressions well. But the K9 track had suggested northeast, and we worked that direction hard. 200 yards of track and then nothing, in terrain that a man in socked feet in sub-freezing temperatures should not have been able to move through quickly enough to vanish cleanly. I requested a full records pull on his phone, call history, location data, anything the carrier could give us. The last location ping was at the Ely fuel station at 5:01 p.m. After that, nothing. The phone had either been powered off or moved out of signal range, and given that the 93 corridor has almost no coverage through that stretch, the carrier couldn't tell us which. The case is still open. It'll probably stay that way for a long time. What I think about when I think about it, and I think about it more than I probably should, given everything else this job puts in front of me, is the boots. Not the jacket, not the wallet, not the phone. The boots. Because the jacket you could explain. Maybe he was warm from the drive. Maybe he left it on instinct. The wallet and the phone, left behind, those are harder, but people do strange things in the middle of strange moments. There are explanations, even if they're uncomfortable ones. But nobody takes off their boots in the Nevada desert at night in February and puts them neatly side by side on the floor of their cab unless they are thinking clearly enough to do it deliberately. That's not panic. That's not a medical event. That's a decision. And the thing that stays with me, the thing I've never been able to square, is that I cannot figure out what decision that is. What you are deciding when you take off your boots, set them next to each other, set your parking brake, close the cab door, and walk out into 50 miles of nothing in the dark. I've lived in this desert my whole life. I know what's out there. There's nothing out there. That's the whole point. That's always been the whole point. The desert doesn't take things. That's what I want you to understand before I tell you any of this. People say that. They talk about the Nevada desert like it's alive, like it reaches up and pulls things down into itself. I've lived out here my whole life. 43 years in this county. The desert doesn't take anything. It just holds whatever gets left in it, and it holds it quietly, and it doesn't care whether you find it or not. That's almost worse. US 93 between Ely and Las Vegas is not a road most people know. If you're not from Nevada, you've probably never heard of it. It doesn't have the romance of Route 66 or the traffic of I-15. It's just 2 lanes of blacktop running south through the high desert, past dry lake beds and juniper flats and the occasional ranch gate that leads to something you can't see from the road. The speed limit is 70, but people drive it faster than that because there's nothing to slow down for. No towns for stretches of 40, 50 miles. No services. No cell signal through most of the middle section. Just the road and the sky and whatever's out there in the scrub on either side. In late February out here, the cold is a different kind of cold than most people are used to. It's not wet. It's not the cold that soaks into you like the Midwest or the Northeast. It's a dry, still cold that sits on top of you like pressure. At night, with no clouds and no light pollution, the temperature drops fast. By 2 a.m. on a clear February night in this part of Nevada, you're looking at single digits in the open flats. maybe below zero in the low spots where the cold air pools. I tell you all of that because it matters. It matters to what we found, and it matters to what we didn't find. A woman called our office on a Wednesday morning. Her husband hadn't come home. He was an owner-operator, had his own rig, ran his own loads, kept his own schedule, which meant there was no company dispatcher to flag it before she did. He'd left 3 days earlier with a partial load of industrial equipment, southbound on 93 toward Las Vegas, and he told her he'd stop in Ely for fuel and call her from there. He stopped in Ely. I confirmed that myself, drove up there and talked to the woman at the fuel desk personally, because I wanted to look at the receipt and look at the pump camera footage before I decided how serious this was. The receipt showed he'd fueled at the Ely Tesoro station at 4:47 p.m. The camera caught him at the pump, his truck, him getting out, him going inside briefly. The woman at the desk remembered him, said he bought a blue Gatorade, said thank you when she gave him his change, went back out to his rig. He pulled out of the Ely station heading south on 93 at approximately 5:03 p.m. We found the truck 53 miles south of Ely on a Friday morning. Spotted it from the road. A semi pulled off on a wide gravel shoulder that ranchers and highway crews use sometimes to turn around or wait out a dust storm. Far enough off the pavement to be deliberate. Not slid off, not forced off. Driven off carefully and parked. And here is the thing that set the tone for everything that followed, the thing I keep coming back to when I try to explain this case to people who ask me about it. The parking brake was set. Not just the truck left in gear on an incline. The parking brake engaged correctly, the way a driver engages it when they're planning to leave the vehicle unattended. The load, industrial equipment, steel components strapped down on a flatbed was fully secured. Every strap in place, every binder tight, like he'd done a pre-trip walk-around before he left. His jacket was on the seat. His boots were on the floor of the cab, side by side, like he'd stepped out of them and set them there. His wallet was in the center console. His phone was face down on the passenger seat. We found no keys, which the manufacturer later confirmed meant they were likely in his pocket. The truck had a push-start system and the fob goes with the driver. So he had his keys. He had no wallet, no phone, no jacket, no boots. In February, in the Nevada high desert, at night, because the timeline put him at that location somewhere between 6 and 8 p.m. based on his fuel stop and average road speed. I've been the chief deputy in this county for 9 years. Before that, I worked patrol for 12. I've worked accidents, I've worked drownings in the summer when people underestimate the rivers. I've worked 2 homicides in my career and a handful of suicides and more missing persons cases than I'd like to count, most of which resolved themselves within 48 hours when the person turned up at a family member's house or a hospital 3 counties over. I say all of that not to establish credentials but to explain that I've developed a certain instinct about cases, an early read, usually within the first hour of a scene, about what kind of case I'm actually looking at. Standing at that truck on that gravel shoulder, I didn't know what kind of case I was looking at. That had never happened to me before. We searched for 4 days. Volunteer crews, a helicopter from the state, 2K, 9 units out of Elko. The terrain in that section of 93 is a mix of open flats and broken country. Dry creek beds cutting through the scrub, low ridgelines running east toward the Snake Range, patches of terrain that look flat from the air but are actually a series of shallow washes that you can walk into and disappear from sight within 20 yards of the road. The K-9 units got a track leading northeast from the truck. About 200 yards out, the track went cold. Handlers said it just stopped. Not at a water source, not at a road, not at any feature that would explain it. Just stopped. One of them told me she'd never had that happen before on an open ground track. Said her dog sat down and looked at her. We searched every wash in a 3-mile radius. We checked a dry lake bed about 4 miles east that local ranchers use as an informal landing strip sometimes. We checked 2 abandoned mine shafts that are marked on the county survey maps. Lowered a camera into both. Nothing. On the 3rd day, we asked the state to send a dive team to a section of the Steptoe Valley drainage that runs maybe 2 miles west of where the truck was found. It's not much of a waterway, more of a seep really in most seasons, but in late February after a wet January it was running. They spent 6 hours in that water. Nothing. His wife drove out from Elko on the 2nd day. I met her at the scene. She stood at the open door of the cab and looked at his boots for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, he never goes anywhere without his boots. Not even to the mailbox. That was the first thing she said to me. Later, in my truck, she told me about his routine. How he called her every evening when he stopped. How he'd been driving this route or variations of it for 11 years and had never once missed a check-in without a good reason. How the load he was carrying was due in Las Vegas on Thursday and he told her he wanted to get it delivered early because they had plans that weekend, her birthday, a dinner reservation she'd made 2 months in advance at a restaurant in Elko that required a reservation 2 months in advance. She had the confirmation email on her phone. She showed me, 2 months out. A man who makes a dinner reservation 2 months in advance, sets his parking brake correctly, secures his load, and takes his keys with him. That man is coming back to his truck. That man has a plan. That man is not walking barefoot into the Nevada desert in February without a reason so urgent it overrode every instinct he had. We never found a footprint. Not one. The ground in that area is a mix of hardpan and loose gravel that doesn't hold impressions well. But the K9 track had suggested northeast, and we worked that direction hard. 200 yards of track and then nothing, in terrain that a man in socked feet in sub-freezing temperatures should not have been able to move through quickly enough to vanish cleanly. I requested a full records pull on his phone, call history, location data, anything the carrier could give us. The last location ping was at the Ely fuel station at 5:01 p.m. After that, nothing. The phone had either been powered off or moved out of signal range, and given that the 93 corridor has almost no coverage through that stretch, the carrier couldn't tell us which. The case is still open. It'll probably stay that way for a long time. What I think about when I think about it, and I think about it more than I probably should, given everything else this job puts in front of me, is the boots. Not the jacket, not the wallet, not the phone. The boots. Because the jacket you could explain. Maybe he was warm from the drive, maybe he left it on instinct. The wallet and the phone, left behind, those are harder, but people do strange things in the middle of strange moments. There are explanations, even if they're uncomfortable ones. But nobody takes off their boots in the Nevada desert at night in February and puts them neatly side by side on the floor of their cab unless they are thinking clearly enough to do it deliberately. That's not panic. That's not a medical event. That's a decision. And the thing that stays with me, the thing I've never been able to square, is that I cannot figure out what decision that is. What you are deciding when you take off your boots, set them next to each other, set your parking brake, close the cab door, and walk out into 50 miles of nothing in the dark. I've lived in this desert my whole life. I know what's out there. There's nothing out there. That's the whole point. That's always been the whole point. I'm going to tell you what the evidence supports. Not what I think. Not what his family believes. Not what the volunteer coordinator told the local paper, which was irresponsible, and I've said so in writing. What the evidence supports. That's the only thing I can give you that's worth anything, and I want to be clear about that distinction before I say another word. The subject was 58 years old. Owner-operator out of Havre, Montana. 19 years behind the wheel, the last 11 of them running his own rig under his own authority. No safety violations on his CDL record. No at-fault accidents. Annual physicals current. Last one cleared 8 months before he disappeared. Cardiac panel normal. Blood work unremarkable. His wife described him as healthy. His doctor's notes describe him as healthy. The records describe him as healthy. I say all of that because the first thing people reach for, when a man his age disappears from a truck, is a medical event. Stroke. Cardiac episode. Confusion from a blood sugar crash. I understand why. It's a tidy explanation. It gives the disappearance a cause, and causes are easier to hold onto than the alternative, which is no explanation at all. We ruled out a medical event. I'll explain why. He fueled at a Casey's General Store in Shelby, Montana, at approximately 6:40 p.m. on a Tuesday in early March. That transaction is documented: fuel receipt, timestamp, pump camera footage. He went inside the store after fueling, which the interior camera confirms. He spoke briefly with the attendant on duty. The attendant described him as normal, unremarkable. Not confused. Not agitated. Not unsteady. He paid for a bottle of water and a bag of trail mix, said thank you, left. The attendant said, and I'm summarizing her statement here, that there was nothing about him that stood out in any way, that he was exactly what he appeared to be, which was a truck driver stopping for fuel on a cold Tuesday evening. He left the Casey's at 6:53 p.m., heading east on US 2. US 2 through that part of Montana is not a road that forgives inattention. 2 lanes, shouldered by wheat fields in the summer and frozen hardpan in March, no median, no guardrail on the open stretches, and a wind that comes off the highline flat and hits your rig sideways like it has an opinion about you. Experienced drivers respect US 2. He was an experienced driver. He knew that road. His truck was located 2 days later. I want you to sit with that for a moment, 2 days later, because that's its own problem, and it's a problem I've had to answer for, and I'll answer for it here the same way I answered for it in the formal review. His wife reported him overdue on Wednesday morning. The report was logged. Based on the information available at intake, adult male, owner-operator, no fixed schedule beyond a general delivery window, no confirmed medical history, no reason to believe anything other than a voluntary delay. The initial classification did not trigger an immediate search response. That classification was made according to protocol. I am not going to tell you the protocol was right. I am going to tell you it was followed. A patrol unit located the truck on Thursday afternoon, responding to a separate call in the area, spotted it on a Forest Service access road approximately 4 miles north of US 2 near the Amarillo River. I need you to understand what that means geographically. A Forest Service access road is unpaved, unmarked on most commercial navigation systems, and designed for vehicles substantially smaller and lighter than a fully loaded semi. It is not a road a commercial truck takes by accident. There are no weight limit signs because the assumption is that no commercial truck will ever be on it. The assumption is correct, essentially universally, except for this one instance. He drove 4 miles down that road deliberately. The truck was parked correctly. I'll say that again because it keeps not landing the way it should with people who hear this case. The truck was parked correctly. Not abandoned in a skid. Not left at an angle. Not sitting on a slope with the wheels turned wrong. It was parked the way a driver parks when he intends to leave the vehicle properly. Gear in neutral, parking brake engaged, engine off. If you'd come across that truck in a normal context, your first thought would have been that the driver had stepped away briefly and would be back. No signs of struggle inside the cab. No blood. No overturned belongings. His jacket was on the sleeper bunk. His phone was on the passenger seat. His logbook was on the dash, closed, with his pen beside it. His medications, he took a low-dose blood pressure medication and a daily aspirin, both prescribed, both documented, were in the door pocket. Both bottles. He had not taken that morning's dose, which I noted and flagged, because it told me something about either the timing of his departure from Shelby or the state he was in when he left the truck. The Amarillo River at that location in early March was running at approximately half its spring capacity, cold, moving, maybe 4 feet deep in the main channel. We requested a dive team. They worked a 300-yard section of the river above and below the access road. They found nothing. We conducted 2 grid searches of the surrounding terrain. Volunteer crews, organized, disciplined. These were not casual walkers, these were people who knew what they were doing. The terrain north of the access road is a mix of cottonwood bottomland along the river and open benchland rising toward the north. In early March, the cottonwood stands still have no leaf cover, which means sightlines are actually better than they'd be in summer. You can see through those trees. The search teams could see through those trees. They found nothing. K-9 units from 2 different agencies worked the area on the first search day. Both dogs tracked from the truck to the river's edge. At the river's edge, both dogs lost the scent. The handlers' reports both used the word simultaneously, which I found notable. Both dogs, different handlers, different agencies, both lost the track at the same point. At the river, I've had people ask me what I make of that. I tell them what the evidence supports, which is that the scent track ended at the water. What you do with that is your business. His wife met with me twice. The first time, 48 hours after the truck was found. She was still in the phase where she needed information, every detail, every timeline point, every result from every search. She took notes. She asked precise, organized questions. She was clearly a person who managed hard things by understanding them completely, and I respected that. I gave her everything I could give her. The second meeting was about 3 weeks later. She came in with a legal pad and left with it still blank. She sat across from me and asked me one question. She said, "Do you think he drove himself out there?" I told her the evidence indicated he drove himself out there. She nodded. Then she said, "Do you think he knew where he was going?" That's not a question the evidence answers. I told her so. She thanked me and left. I think about that question more than I should. It's not investigatively useful. It doesn't move the case forward. But it's the question that sits underneath all the other questions. Underneath the parking brake and the medications and the K9 tracks in the river. And it doesn't go away just because I can't answer it. Because here's what I know. A 58-year-old man with 19 years of driving experience turned off a major highway in the dark, drove 4 miles down a road that commercial trucks have no business being on, parked his vehicle correctly in a location with no logical reason to stop, and then, based on everything we can establish, walked to a river in early March in northern Montana without his jacket, without his phone, without his medications, and was never seen again. I have worked missing persons cases for a long time. I have seen runaways, I have seen genuine accidents, I have seen people who wanted to be found and people who didn't. I've worked cases that looked like one thing and turned out to be another, and I've worked cases that still sit on my desk after years with no movement, no resolution, no answer that satisfies anyone including me. This case sits on my desk. What I will tell you, and this is the closest I will come to speculation, so mark it as such, is that the 4 miles matter. People ask why he didn't stop on US 2. Why he didn't pull over on the highway shoulder if something was wrong. Why he turned north on an unpaved Forest Service road and drove 4 miles before he stopped. And the honest answer is that I don't know. But in my experience, when a person puts deliberate distance between themselves and a main road, they are trying to ensure something. What that something is, in this case, I cannot tell you. The case is open. That's the accurate statement. It's been open long enough that the paperwork has moved from the active file drawer to a different drawer, which has a different label, but is the same desk. Same office. Same unresolved question sitting in the middle of it like something I keep walking around. He fueled at a Casey's in Shelby at 6:40 p.m. He said thank you. He left. 21 years in this job. That's what I have. And I cannot tell his wife or you or myself why a careful man drove 4 miles into the dark, set his parking brake, and walked to a river he had no reason to walk to. I can only tell you that he did. He called me every night for 14 years. I want you to really hear that before anything else. Not most nights. Not when he remembered. Not when the signal was good enough or he wasn't too tired or the stop wasn't too short. Every night. 14 years of long haul for different trucks, 3 different companies, 2 cross-country routes, and then the Tennessee corridor he ran for the last 6 years of our marriage. And not one single night went by without that call. It didn't matter if it was 11 p.m. or 2 a.m. or once. Memorably, for 47 in the morning from a rest area in Arkansas because he'd been stuck behind an accident closure for 3 hours and hadn't found a safe place to stop until then. He called. It was the architecture of our life together. That's the only way I know how to say it. Not a habit. Not a routine. The architecture. The thing the whole structure was built around. I planned my evenings around it. I'd stay up if I needed to. I'd have my phone off the charger. I'd be somewhere quiet. Because the call was coming and I was going to be there for it. The night he didn't call, I convinced myself of a dead zone for 6 hours. Tennessee has them, real ones, not excuses. Patches on I-24. Especially down near the Georgia line where the road cuts through the ridges and the signal just drops. I knew that. I'd driven that stretch with him once years ago when we took a vacation and he wanted to show me what his nights looked like, and I'd watched my phone go from 4 bars to nothing to 4 bars again inside of 15 minutes. So when 11 p.m. came and went and my phone stayed quiet, I told myself dead zone. I made dinner. I watched something on television I couldn't tell you the name of now. I folded laundry. I went to bed at 11:30 with my phone on the pillow next to me. I woke up at 3 a.m. and the screen was dark and I knew. I didn't call anyone. I didn't check the news. I just lay there in the dark and knew, the way you know things sometimes before you have any right to know them, before there's a single fact to justify the knowing. And then I picked up my phone and called his number and it rang 4 times and went to voicemail and I heard his voice telling me to leave a message and I hung up without saying anything. I called the Tennessee Highway Patrol at 3:22 a.m. The officer who answered was kind. He took my information and explained that without more evidence of an emergency, they couldn't initiate a full search yet, but they'd flag his plates and route and ask patrol units to keep an eye out. He used the word flag. I remember focusing on that word for a long time after I hung up. Flag. Like my husband was a note in a margin. Something someone might get to. The Love's truck stop in Monteagle had him on camera. That's the one on the mountain, the big facility on I-24 right at the top of the Cumberland Plateau where a lot of drivers stop before they start the descent, because the grade going down toward Chattanooga is serious and you want your head right before you take it. He stopped there at 8:47 p.m. The camera had him at the fuel pumps, then inside. He was in the store for about 11 minutes, which was longer than usual for him, but the detective who reviewed the footage said there was nothing to read into it. He bought food, he used the restroom, he came back out. He sat in his truck for 22 minutes before he pulled back onto the highway. 22 minutes. I didn't know that detail until 2 weeks after he disappeared. The detective mentioned it almost as an aside, like it was a footnote in the timeline, and I had to ask him to repeat it because I thought I'd misheard. 22 minutes sitting in a parked truck in the Love's lot in Monteagle. Engine on, not moving, not fueling, not on the phone. They checked his phone records, no calls outgoing or incoming during that window. Just sitting. He never sat. That was the thing. He was constitutionally incapable of sitting still in a parked truck. He'd complain about dock wait times the way other people complain about root canals. Every minute the truck wasn't moving was a minute wasted, in his philosophy. He ate while he drove if he could manage it. He did his logbook entries at red lights. 22 minutes stationary in a parking lot, for no recorded reason, was not something he did. I asked the detective what he thought the man was doing in that truck for 22 minutes. He said he didn't know. I think he was deciding something. That's what I think on the days when I let myself think about it directly instead of sideways. I think he was sitting in that lot at the top of the mountain with the valley falling away in front of him and the lights of Chattanooga 60 miles south, and he was deciding something. And then he decided, and he put the truck in gear, and he pulled back onto I-24 heading east. They found the truck 3 days later at a rest area outside of Cookeville. That's roughly 60 miles east of Monteagle, which means he drove past his normal route entirely. His delivery was in Nashville, which is northwest of Monteagle, not east. He went the wrong direction. Or he went a direction he chose. I've never been able to decide which way to think about it. The truck was pulled into the rest area correctly. A normal stop, the kind of pull-in you do if you were taking a 30-minute break. Not emergency stopped, not hidden, just parked. The load was still on the trailer. His overnight bag was on the bunk. Packed, zipped, like he'd closed it up deliberately. His phone was on the passenger seat. His wedding ring was in the cup holder. I've said that sentence more times than I can count, and it still does the same thing to me every time. His wedding ring was in the cup holder. In 14 years he took it off exactly once that I know of. He was helping his brother pour a concrete pad and he didn't want to lose it in the mix, so he put it in his front pocket and showed me it was there before he left and showed me it was back on his finger when he got home that evening. That was the only time. So he took it off at some point between Monteagle and Cookeville. Took it off and put it in the cup holder. And the question that I have lived inside of for years now, the question that wakes me up and follows me through the day and sits at the dinner table with me and stands in the shower with me, is whether that was intentional or not. Because there are two versions and I cannot determine which one is true and no one has been able to help me determine it. In one version, he took the ring off and put it in the cup holder deliberately, as a message, as a final act with meaning behind it. As a thing he wanted found and understood. In the other version, his hands were swollen from a long drive, that happened sometimes, fluid retention, he'd mentioned it, and he took the ring off for comfort and set it in the nearest flat surface, which was the cup holder, because that's where you set small things in a truck cab, and it meant nothing except that his fingers hurt. I have cycled between those two versions so many times that I have stopped being able to hold either one for very long. The detectives couldn't tell me. The grief counselor I saw for 8 months said it might not be knowable, and that I might have to find a way to live without knowing. She was right. I haven't managed it yet. The rest area outside Cookeville has cameras. They cover the entrance, the parking area, and the building. The footage from the night he stopped showed his truck pulling in at 11:58 p.m., almost exactly when he should have been calling me if the call had come. He parked. The truck's lights went off. And then for 3 hours, nothing, no movement, no door opening, no one getting out. At 3:14 a.m., a figure left the truck from the passenger side. The detective told me this carefully, watching my face when he said it. The passenger side. Not the driver's door, which opens onto the traffic lane of the parking area. The passenger side, which opens away from the lot, toward the tree line behind the rest area facilities. The camera angle was wrong. They couldn't see where the figure went. They could see it left. That's all. I asked the detective what that meant, the passenger door. He said it might mean someone else was involved. It might mean he was simply trying to avoid being seen from the lot. He said both were possible. I've added that to the list of things I can't hold for very long. He called me every night for 14 years. Not most nights. Every night. And then on a Tuesday in November, he stopped at the top of a mountain and sat in a parking lot for 22 minutes and made a decision I will never fully understand. And he drove the wrong direction, and he left his ring in the cup holder, and someone or something left through the passenger door into a tree line at 3:14 in the morning. And the phone on the passenger seat never rang. I still have the same number. I haven't changed it. I tell myself it's because it would be too much hassle porting the number, setting everything up again. That's not why. I think I'm still waiting for the call. I think some part of me, the part that lived inside the architecture for 14 years, is still waiting for the phone to go off at 2 a.m. and for his voice to come through saying he made it, he's stopped for the night, he'll be home in 2 days, don't worry. That part of me is going to wait for a long time. There's a thing that happens to you when you drive the same road enough times. You stop seeing it. Not because it becomes boring, the $1 million highway between Durango and Ouray never becomes boring, not if you have any sense of self-preservation at all, but because familiarity is its own kind of blindness. You stop registering the drop-offs because your hands already know where the wheel needs to be. You stop thinking about the altitude because your body has adjusted. You stop marveling at the rock faces because you've seen them in every season and every light and they've become wallpaper. The road becomes automatic. And automatic is a dangerous thing to become on US 550 in October, when the first ice forms on the shaded curves before sunrise and the morning light plays tricks on your depth perception and the mountain doesn't care how many times you've driven it before. He knew that. He talked about it. He had a whole philosophy about it, about the difference between respect and familiarity, and how familiarity was the thing that killed experienced drivers, not inexperience. He said the drivers who scared him most weren't the ones who'd never seen a mountain road. They were the ones who'd seen it so many times they'd stopped being scared of it. I've thought about that a lot since he disappeared. The irony of it sits in me like something I can't digest. I was his dispatcher for 4 years. Not his only point of contact, there were 3 of us working rotation on that corridor, but I was the one who had him most consistently, and over 4 years you develop a working relationship with a driver that's closer than most people realize. You learn their voice. You learn the difference between their tired voice and their alert voice. You learn when they're running behind and compensating and when they're running smooth. You learn the small signals, the slight delay before they answer, the change in background noise, the way their radio check-ins get shorter as a shift goes long. You learn to read a person through a CB transmission the way other people read a face. He checked in at 7:15 a.m. from Durango, heading north on 550. Running empty. He dropped a manufactured goods load the previous afternoon and was dead-heading back to the terminal in Montrose. Empty runs on that road have their own risk profile. A loaded trailer gives you ballast and grip, but empty you're lighter, and light on switchbacks at altitude in early October means the wind has more to say about where you go. He knew that too. He always knew that. The check-in was normal. His voice was normal. He said he was starting up the pass, gave me his fuel level and his ETA for Montrose, asked me to note in the system that he wanted to swap to a different trailer on his next load because the one he'd been running had a shimmy in the rear axle that maintenance had looked at twice without fixing. I logged it. That was the last thing in the log from him, a maintenance complaint about a shimmy in a trailer he'd already returned. The last call I received from him was practical and slightly irritated and entirely, completely ordinary. Protocol on 550 is that you check in from the bottom, and you check in when you're through. The pass doesn't have reliable signal in the middle section, between Silverton and Ouray especially. You can go dark for 20-25 minutes and that's normal, that's just the terrain. So when his next check-in didn't come at the expected time, I gave it the standard buffer. 10 minutes. 15. Then I tried to raise him on the radio. Nothing. 20 minutes. Nothing. I called the Uray County Sheriff's Office at 8:42 a.m. Here is the thing that I want you to understand about what happened next, because it's the thing that separated this case from a straightforward accident call from the moment the first responders reached the scene. They didn't find him at the bottom of a ravine. I know that's what you assumed. I know that's what anyone assumes when you say a truck went dark on the $1 Million Highway. The road has no guardrails in most places. The drop-offs on the eastern side go hundreds of feet straight down into the Uncompahgre Gorge. If a rig goes over the edge on that road, you're not looking for a missing person, you're looking for wreckage, and you know where to look, and it's a recovery operation, not a search. I've had 2 drivers go over the edge in my years on that corridor. I know what that looks like. I know the calls. This was not that call. His truck was found at 10:20 a.m. by a hiker who'd been coming down from a trail above the highway, parked in a wide turnout about 2 miles below Red Mountain Pass, one of the designated pullouts they built into that section of road so slower vehicles can let traffic pass. Legal. Correct. The kind of stop you'd make if you were waiting out a slow-moving vehicle ahead of you or giving yourself a minute to check your mirrors before a technical section. The engine was running. The heat was on. The hazard lights were not on, which I noted when the hiker described it to the 911 dispatcher, because on that road, in that kind of stop, you put your hazards on. You do it automatically. You do it because the alternative is someone coming around a curve and not having time to react. He knew that. He had been putting his hazards on at that pullout on that road for years. They were off. The hiker said she'd passed that same pullout that morning on her way up, maybe 2 hours before she came back down. The truck had been there then too, already empty. She'd assumed the driver was taking a break. Maybe sleeping in the cab, maybe using the bushes on the uphill side. She hadn't thought anything of it. She thought something of it on her way down, when it was still there and still running and 2 hours had passed. Inside the cab, his thermos on the dash half full. His jacket on the passenger seat, his good jacket, the one he wore when he expected to be outside for more than a minute or two, the one with the fleece lining and the reflective strip across the back. His phone in the center console, unlocked, screen on, the GPS app still showing his route north on 550. The last thing the GPS had done was reroute. It had flagged a suggested rest stop ahead, the way GPS systems do automatically, and the screen was showing that notification, waiting for him to dismiss it. He had not dismissed it. The road was dry that day. I need to say that plainly because people hear $1 Million Highway in October and they hear ice and they start building an explanation around conditions. There were no conditions. A Colorado DOT crew had been on that section of 550 the previous afternoon and had filed a clear road report. The temperature at the pullout elevation, when the truck was found, was 34 degrees, cold but above freezing. Nothing that would create surface ice on a road that had been in direct sunlight since 7 a.m. Visibility was unlimited. You could see the San Juan peaks from that pullout clearly enough to count the snowfields on them. There was no reason to stop where he stopped. That's the phrase the Uray County investigator used, and I've borrowed it because it's precise. There was no mechanical reason, the truck was running fine. There was no safety reason, the road was clear, the visibility was perfect. The pullout he chose was not at any particularly technical curve. There was no navigation reason. He wasn't lost. He'd driven that road more times than either of us could count. There was no reason. He stopped for no reason, and he left for no reason, and he took nothing with him. Search and rescue worked that area for 3 days. The terrain above the pullout on the western side goes up steeply into the San Juan Range. Talus fields, old mining roads, the kind of high-altitude landscape that's genuinely hostile to human survival without proper gear in October. The terrain below the pullout on the eastern side drops toward the gorge, but the gorge was searched too, both from the rim and from below. Nothing. I've dispatched that corridor for 9 years. I've talked drivers through wideouts and mechanical failures and medical scares, and one situation I will not describe here because it was too specific and too awful, and it resolved in the worst possible way. I know that road. I know its moods. I know the sound of a driver who is in trouble on it. He did not sound like a driver in trouble. He sounded like a man with a maintenance complaint and an ETA and 4 years of doing his job well. He sounded like a Tuesday morning in October. Nothing special, nothing wrong. Another run up the pass and back down the other side and home by early afternoon. What I think about now when I let myself think about it is the GPS notification. The screen on, the rerouting suggestion waiting, the notification he hadn't dismissed. Because that means when he left the truck, however he left it, for whatever reason, in whatever state of mind, he left in a moment. Not after sitting and deliberating the way the Love's parking lot man sat for 22 minutes in someone else's story. Not with his bag packed. Not with anything arranged. He left mid-thought. The road through that canyon does something to you if you let it. He told me that once we were on a long check-in, slow night, and he was talking about what it felt like to drive the gorge section in the dark with the river below and the walls on both sides. He said sometimes, on the right night, it felt like the road was the only thing in the world. Like everything else fell away and there was just the truck and the canyon and the white line and the dark. He said it like it was beautiful. I used to think he meant the solitude. The quiet that comes with that particular kind of focused driving. I used to hear it as a man describing what he loved about his work. I don't know what I hear it as now. The pullout is still there. They didn't mark it or close it or do anything to it. You can still pull off in that spot, look north toward Red Mountain Pass, look south toward Silverton, and see exactly what he would have seen from his window on an October morning with unlimited visibility and no reason to stop. I've driven that road since. Once. It was necessary for something work-related and I had no choice. When I reached that pullout, I didn't stop. I didn't look at it. I kept my eyes on the center line and I drove past it at exactly the speed limit. But I felt it when I passed it. The way you feel a thing you've been carrying when you set it down briefly and pick it back up. That pullout is going to be the same pullout forever. The mountain doesn't mark the things that happen on it. It just holds the road, and the road holds the white line, and the white line holds the driving, and none of it cares what happened in that space on that morning. He drove up the pass and didn't come down. That's the whole story. I don't know how to make it smaller than that. His mother asked me to talk about this publicly. She said I was the last person who actually listened to him, really listened, not just nodded and moved on, and that if I had something to say, she wanted it said where people could hear it. So I'm saying it. I met him at a Petro truck stop off I-40, just east of Little Rock. This was a Thursday, late October, the kind of Arkansas evening where the humidity hasn't fully let go yet and the air feels thick even when it's cold. I was deadheading back from a drop in Memphis, running light, in no particular hurry, and I'd stopped for coffee and something that wasn't a gas station sandwich because I'd had enough of those for 1 week. The diner inside the Petro was maybe half full. A few solo drivers, a couple at a corner booth, a family with kids who should have been asleep 3 hours ago. He was at the counter. I sat 2 stools down because the rest of the seats were taken or had someone's jacket on them, and we didn't talk for the first few minutes. That's normal. Truck stop counter etiquette is basically the same as bar etiquette. You don't open conversations with strangers unless there's an obvious in, and we were both just men eating food and drinking coffee and looking at nothing in particular. Then his phone buzzed on the counter and he looked at it and something changed in his face. Not dramatically. Not the way it changes in movies where the color drains and the jaw drops. Just a tightening. A small, controlled rearrangement of his expression that a person who wasn't paying attention would have missed completely. He looked at the screen for maybe 3 seconds, turned it face down, and went back to his food. I don't know why I said anything. Maybe because the tightening in his face reminded me of something I recognized. Maybe because it was a slow night and I was in one of those moods where the road has been too quiet for too long and human contact feels necessary. I said something like, "Rough day?" He looked at me for a second like he was deciding whether I was worth the energy. Then he said, "You ever feel like something is paying attention to you?" I want to be precise about that phrasing because I've repeated it so many times and I want to make sure I'm not drifting from it. Not following you. Not watching you. Paying attention. Like there was a difference in his mind between those things, and the difference mattered. I asked him what he meant. He told me about the truck. 2 nights before our conversation, he'd been running a load through eastern Arkansas, back roads, US 79, cutting south from Forest City toward Pine Bluff because the weight restriction on his preferred route was posted and he was over limit. Dark road, no median, flat delta farmland on both sides. Around 11 p.m., he noticed headlights behind him. Not close, maybe a 1/4 mile back, which is a normal following distance for that kind of 2-lane road at night. He didn't think anything of it. An hour later, the headlights were still there. Same distance. He'd varied his speed, slowed down to let whoever it was pass, sped up to create distance, and the gap stayed consistent. Not closing in, not falling back. Maintaining. He said it felt calibrated. That was his word, calibrated. Like whoever was back there was doing it intentionally, keeping exactly the distance they wanted to keep. He pulled into a way station that was open late. He remembered it was the one on US 65 just south of the intersection with 238. He pulled in, went through the process, and looked in his mirror. The truck behind him had pulled in too. Not to be weighed. It sat in the far lane, lights off, engine presumably running. He said he sat in that way station for 6 minutes. He knew because he watched the clock on his dash. 6 minutes, and the other truck didn't move, didn't leave, didn't pull up to the scales. Just sat in the dark lane with its lights off. When he pulled back onto 65, the truck pulled out behind him. It followed him for another 40 miles before it turned off at an unmarked road near Dumas, and he never got a clear look at it. No plates visible, no markings, nothing identifying. Just a truck that knew where he was going before he got there and stayed exactly as far back as it needed to stay. He called the Arkansas State Police from a truck stop in McGee that night. He told me exactly what they told him. Keep driving, it'll probably turn off. If it follows you into a populated area, call again. It turned off before that happened. He never called again. Now here's the part I've had to live with since his mother first contacted me. I believed him. I want to be clear about that because it would be easier in retrospect to say I thought he was road-weary and imagining things. It would be more comfortable. It would let me off the hook in a way I don't deserve to be let off. But I believed him. The way he told it, the speed variation he'd tried, the way station stopped, the 6 minutes he'd watched the clock. That's not how people describe something their tired brain invented. That's how people describe something they experienced and are still trying to understand. But here's what I said out loud. Probably nothing. Weird coincidence. Road paranoia happens, the hours get long, lights play tricks. He nodded. Said yeah, probably. I said it because I didn't know what else to say. Because sitting in a truck stop diner in Arkansas at 10 p.m., there is no good answer to a man telling you something has been paying attention to him. Because agreeing with him would have meant agreeing that he was in danger, and I didn't know what to do with that, and it was easier to smooth it over than to sit inside it with him. He ate the rest of his meal and left maybe 20 minutes later. We shook hands at the door. He said he appreciated someone listening. That's what he said, not just that I'd talked to him, but that I'd listened. And I stood there and watched him walk across the parking lot to his rig, a Peterbilt 389 with Oklahoma plates, and I thought he seemed like a man who was going to be fine. 3 days later, his load never arrived in Oklahoma City. His truck was found outside of Henrietta, Oklahoma, off I-40, at a Flying J, pulled across 2 parking spaces at an angle that was wrong for him. He was meticulous about his parking. His coworkers said so, his company said so, the Flying J manager who'd seen him stop there before said so. He parked straight, always. Used the lines. He took up 2 spaces at an angle like he'd come in fast and stopped. Inside the cab, phone charging on the passenger side. Wallet in the center console. His load paperwork stacked on the dash. Delivery appointment highlighted in yellow like he'd been reviewing it before the stop. The keys were in the ignition, engine off. Outside the cab, nothing. The Flying J cameras caught his truck pulling in at 2:23 a.m. The angle of entry was wrong. Too fast, too diagonal, like a man who'd made a decision to stop suddenly rather than a planned rest break. The cameras covered the fuel island and the store entrance but not the far end of the lot where he parked. The manager checked at 6 a.m. when a driver reported the badly parked rig. The lot was busy enough at that hour that nobody could say with confidence when it had arrived or whether anyone had been near it. Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation picked it up. They interviewed the Arkansas State Police about his earlier call. The officer who took his report that night in McGee had logged it. It was in the system, the call existed, the complaint was documented. The OSBI asked whether any follow-up had been done at the time. The answer was no. The call had been logged as a non-emergency report. No plates to run, no description sufficient to act on, no crime committed. His mother told me what the investigator told her. She told me because she wanted me to understand the full shape of it. the investigator said, and she is a precise woman who does not misremember things. He said, we can't establish a connection between the Arkansas incident and the disappearance. We can only establish that both things happened. Two things happened. A truck followed him for 40 miles in the dark and sat in a way station with its lights off for 6 minutes. And 3 days later he was gone. And officially, formally, procedurally, there is no established connection between those two facts. I've thought about what it means to pay attention to something. The way he used that phrase, not following, not watching, paying attention, like there's an intention behind it, like being the object of that kind of focus changes you, makes you into something you weren't before, like he'd been noticed in a way he didn't choose and couldn't undo. I told him it was probably nothing. His mother forgave me for that. She said there was nothing I could have done differently that would have changed what happened. She's a generous woman, and I think she believes that. I'm not sure I do. Because here's what I know, sitting on this side of it, years past that diner counter in Arkansas, he was trying to tell someone. He had been trying to tell someone since the night in McGee when the state police logged it as non-emergency and moved on. He was carrying something nobody would help him carry, and when a stranger 2 stools down at a truck stop counter asked him if he'd had a rough day, he opened up the whole thing and laid it out, and I handed it back to him wrapped in probably nothing and watched him walk out to his truck. He said he appreciated someone listening. The distance between listening and hearing is the thing I think about. I did the first one. I didn't do the second. And I don't know if it would have mattered. I don't know if anything would have mattered, if whatever was paying attention to him had already made its decision by the time we were sitting at that counter. But I know he sat down next to a stranger and told him the truth, and the stranger said probably nothing. And 3 days later, the truck was parked wrong at a Flying J in Henrietta, and the keys were in the ignition, and the delivery appointment was highlighted in yellow like he'd been planning to make it. He was planning to make it. That's the part nobody put in any report. That's the part his mother wanted said out loud, in public, where people could hear it. He wasn't a man who was giving up. He was a man who was scared, and who had tried to tell someone, and who was planning to make his delivery and go home. And something was paying attention to him. And now he's gone. If any of these stories stayed with you, they should. Because every one of these men was real in the way that matters. They had routes they ran, trucks they knew better than their own living rooms, people waiting for them to call. They had coffee in thermoses and rings on their fingers and deliveries highlighted in yellow. And somewhere out on the American highway, in the middle of a completely ordinary night, they simply ceased to arrive. This is Bleak Fears. We don't tie these stories up because they don't tie up. We just make sure they're not forgotten. If this one found you, subscribe, because there are more roads, more dark stretches, more unanswered radios. And someone should be keeping count.